Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Sadichet. We're talking about this Mishnah of someone who borrows a cow for half a day and rents it for half a day. Or, case B, he borrows it today and rents it tomorrow. Or case C, he actually gets two cows. One of them he rents, means he pays to use it, and the other one he borrows, meaning he doesn't pay to use it, and it dies a natural death. So if he is a sho'el, he is responsible for onis. If he's a soched, then he's not responsible. So now we have different claims. The lender says that, in the last case it goes in A, B, C, C, B, A, chiastic order here. In the last case of if it was two, it's the borrowed one that died, and therefore you have to pay. Or in the middle case, he says it was on the day that it was lent, that you borrowed it, or it was at the time that you borrowed it in the first case. And therefore, whatever it is, you have to pay because you are a sho'el. The borrower says, listen, I don't really know. I don't know which of the two cows it is, or which day or which time it was. So now you have a bari and shema. You have one claim is certain, or vadai, and the other says, I don't really know, and therefore the stronger vadai claim will win out, and the borrower does have to pay. Okay, that was case one. Case two was flipped around. Case three in the Mishnah is that they both say vadai, and there you need to swear. And then the third case, neither of them know. Both say, I don't know, and then they split it. All right, now in the discussion regarding the first case, we compared our Mishnah to a case where someone says, you owe me 100 dinar, and the other one says, I don't know, maybe I do, maybe I don't, I'm not sure. And he is liable. Okay, so we can derive from here, we're comparing the two cases, and that would make sense. Just like in the Mishnah, the borrower, a renter, is liable, so too that would be the same in this case. However, that makes sense according to Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, who say in fact chayav in that case. However, according to Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan, in the case of the monetary loan, they say patur. So how can we reconcile their opinion with the equivalent case in our Mishnah, which says chayav? And we answered that Rav Nachman, indeed, if the Mishnah is as you understood it to be a simple case of one claims everything and the other claims nothing, that I don't know about any of the amount. One says 100, other says I don't know about anything of the amount, I don't admit to any part of it, then in fact it would be patur. And the same thing would be true, right, in this case of the monetary loan, and in the Mishnah's case, since there also he's saying, listen, I think it could be that I was a renter for the one that died was a renter, so I was a rental, or it was at the time of rental, and therefore I'm not sure if I have to pay anything at all. So then in that case, in fact, we'd be patur. However, Rav Nachman admits that there is a case in which one would be chayav, and he's going to explain the Mishnah according to that. What would be the case? When there is a matter of an oath. What is that matter of an oath? Well, Rava explained it. If it's a modeh b'miksat case, one person says, you owe me 100 dinar, and the other one says, I admit to 50. Yes, I do owe you 50, but the other 50, I'm not sure. Now, if he said, I admit 50, and the other 50, I do not owe you, for sure I don't owe you, that's a classic case of modeh b'miksat, and the defendant has to make a vow, and then he pays the 50, and he doesn't have to pay the other 50. But in this case, since he does not know, he cannot make a vow. He can't make a vow that he doesn't owe it, because maybe he does. He's not going to make a false vow. So since the only way to get out of the other 50 that he's not admitting to is to make a vow, and he can't make a vow, so that means he has to pay. Okay, so that's what Rav Nachman says that we can create a case like that. And so too, in our Mishnah, we'll have to come up with a case in which it will be a kind of modeh b'miksat. He admits to some and doesn't know about the rest of it. However, to fit that into our Mishnah is not so easy to do. And so that's what we're going to do now. Note that, according to Ramban and Rashba, the following few lines, few paragraphs, are not original to the Amoraim, to the original editing of the Talmud, but rather were added on by Rav Yehudai Gaon, who was still very early but later than the Amoraim, a later layer than most of the Talmud. So it's more like a commentary, but it's an early commentary. So it made it into the editing of the Talmud, into the final Talmud, and it is in fact found in all manuscripts. So it is part of the Talmud as it has been transmitted to us. But since it is a commentary, one could possibly come up with other possibilities. Okay, so mashkachat la resha b'shtayim v'sefa b'shalosh. Even though a simple reading of our Mishnah is that it's talking about the Resha is the first two cases. The first two cases, simple reading, is talking about one cow that was borrowed half a day and rented half a day, borrowed one day, rented one day. And the Sefa here means the third case. So the simple reading is there's two animals. One he rented and one he borrowed. Okay, that would be a simple case. The problem, if you just go with the simple case, let's say it's only one animal, where's the modeh b'miksat? We can't come up with a modeh b'miksat with just one animal. And therefore, we're now reading in that actually the Resha is talking about where there's two cows, and the Sefa, meaning the third case, is actually when there's three cows. It's not so easy to fit this into the wording of the Mishnah, but if you want to fit it in with according to Rav Nachman, then you have to say something like this. So how does that work? Resha b'shtayim damar le shte parot masarti lecha palged yoma b'sheila ufalged yoma b'schirut ina me'echad yoma b'sheila v'echad yoma b'schirut umetu tarvar be'idan sheila. So the Resha, meaning which is the first two cases, that's where he gets two cows. And he says, the owner says to the watchman, I gave you two cows. For half the day you were you were borrowing the two cows. And for half the day you were renting the two cows. That was the first case. Or the second case, you were borrowing both cows for one day, and the next day you were renting both cows. And I am claiming, I know, that they both died at the time of She'ilah, either in the half day or the day that it was borrowed, and therefore you are liable. It's honest, and you are liable. Ve'amar le'shoel hada'in be'idan She'ilah meta ve'idach le'yadana I be'idan She'ilah meta I be'idan sechirut meta demitoch sheno yachol yishaba meshalem. The borrower says, I admit to one of them that in fact that was at the time of borrowing, and therefore I am liable in ones. However, the other one that died, I am not sure if it died on the day of borrowing or on the day of renting. Now, so he is now modeh b'miksat. He admits that he owes the money for one of the cows, and so he's definitely going to pay that. In order to not pay the other part, because this is a modeh b'miksat, he would have to make a vow. The problem is he cannot make a vow because he's not sure. So he can't make a vow on something he's not sure about, and that's why he has to pay. And so even the Rav Nachman would agree in this case that he will have to pay, and so that's how we can reconcile Rav Nachman with our Mishnah. Now that explains the first two cases. But what about the third case, which in the simple reading was two cows, one borrowed, one rented? Sefa b'shalosh, amar le'shalosh parot natati lecha, shetayim b'sheila v'achat b'schirut, umetu hani tarte de'sheila. So in this case, there were three cows altogether, and the owner comes and makes the following claim. I gave you three cows. Two of them you borrowed, one of them you rented. And two out of the three died. Which two? The owner says, I know my animals. It was the two that were borrowed. And therefore, a borrower is chayav be'ones. You have to pay for two cows. ואמר לשואל, אין, חדה דשאילה מתה, אידך לא ידענה אי דשאילה מתה, ודקיימה דשכירות היא, אי דשכירות מתה, והדקיימה דשאילה היא, ומתוך שאינו יכול להישבע, משלם. And so the defendant, he admits that he got three animals, and two of them were borrowed and one of them was rented. And so he says, I admit that one of the animals that died was one that I borrowed, and I have to pay you for one. That's for sure. I admit to that. However, the other one, I don't know if it was the borrowed one that died and the rented one is alive, or the rented one died and the borrowed one is alive, and therefore I'm not sure if I have to pay for that. So in this case, he has to pay for one for sure, and he could get out of it as modeh b'miksat if he made a vow, but he can't make a vow because he doesn't know. He can't say, I make a vow, I don't owe you that. Maybe he does owe the other one, and therefore he has to pay. Okay, good. So now we solve the Mishnah according to all three sections of the Mishnah, all three clauses within the first case, according to Rav Nachman. However, one more complication. Ulrami bar Chama damar arba'a shomerim sirichin kefira b'miksat vehoda'a b'miksat. Mashkachat la resha b'shalosh v'sefa be'arba'a. Rami bar Chama has a unique opinion. We saw this back in Baba Kama. When it comes to any of the four shomerim, in order to have a case that they are modeh b'miksat, that they would have to make a vow on whatever it is that each of the shomerim is patur about. To have a case of modeh b'miksat, you actually need three claims. The claims have to be partial denial, partial admission, but there's also another one as follows. There has to be one that they totally categorically agree, I borrowed this thing and I owe it to you. Yes. There has to be a categorical denial, which is, I never borrowed that thing in the first place. And there also has to be a partial denial. That's the kefira, b'miksat. Yes, I did borrow it, but I don't owe it for whatever reason. Okay, so in order to create, therefore, a modeh b'miksat case in our Mishnah, in order to satisfy Rav Nachman, you would actually have to have 3 cows in the Resha, which is the first 2 cases in the Mishnah, and 4 cows in the Sefa in the third case in the Mishnah. And we explain. Resha b'shalosh, damar le, shalosh parod natati lecha, palged yoma b'sheila, palged yoma b'schirut, ina mechad yoma b'sheila, v'chad yoma b'schirut, umetu shalosh, kulehu be'idan sheila. The lender says, I gave you 3 cows, right? This is the Resha of the first 2 cases. And he says, half the day, all 3 were to be borrowed by you, and half the day, you're a renter. Or the second case is that today, you're borrowing all 3, and tomorrow you're going to be renting all 3. All 3 of them died a natural death, which is ones. And therefore, he says, you have to pay me for all 3 of them, because you borrowed all 3. V'amar le'sho'el, the defendant claims back, Hada lo hayu devarim me'olam, v'chada in be'idan she'ila meta, v'idach le'yadan e'i be'idan she'ila meta, v'i be'idan sechirut meta, demitoch sheno yachol lishaba meshalem. He says, I said, one of them I never got from you. I never got 3 animals from you. I only got 2. So that's the complete denial. And then he says, one of them, you're right. You gave it to me and it died while I was a borrower, and therefore I have to pay you. Good, that's the total admission. And the other one is the partial. He says the third one, I did borrow it from you, it's true. However, I am not sure myself if it died on the time or the day of borrowing, or it was at the time or day of rental. Now, he cannot make a vow because he doesn't know, and therefore, he's going to have to pay for all 3. That's the first 2 cases called the Resha. Sefa be'arba damar le, arba parod natati lecha, shalosh b'shila v'chada b'schirut, umetu hanach, shalosh desh'ila. The third case in the Mishnah, called the Sefa, is talking about 4 animals. Here, the giver of the animals says, I gave you 4 animals. 3 of them you borrowed, 1 of them you rented. And 3 of them died, 3 out of the 4 died, and he says, I know that all 3 were the borrowed ones that died, and therefore you have to pay me for all 3. The borrower says, one of them never happened. You only gave me 3 in the first place, so I'm completely denying 1. And one of them, I admit, in fact, it was one of the ones that was borrowed, and it died, and I do owe you for that one. And the last one, I'm not sure which one died. I'm not sure if the rented one died and the one that I borrowed is the one that's alive, and therefore I don't have to pay because that was the sechirut. I don't have to pay for honest for that one. Or if it was the one that I borrowed that died and the one that I rented is alive. So since I'm not sure and he can't make a vow, therefore he has to pay for all 3 cows. Okay, so now we explained that clause. Next clause. Ze omer she'ula v'ze omer sechura, yishaba socher she'sechura meta. Now we're going back to the basic Peshat reading of the Mishnah, that there are 2 cows, one was borrowed, one was rented, one of them died. So the owner of the cows says that I know for sure it was the one that you borrowed that died and you have to pay. And the borrower says, no, I know for sure it was the one that I rented and therefore I don't have to pay. So we say, but nevertheless, the borrower does have to make a vow that in fact it was the rented one that died. Now we ask, Ve'amai, mashe te'ano lo hodalo, u'mashe hodalo lo te'ano. Why does he have to make a vow? Why can't the borrower just ignore him? He doesn't have proof that it was the borrowed one that died. So you bring proof. Why do I have to make a vow at all? This is not a case of modeh b'miksat because that which the owner claimed, he did not admit to that. The owner claimed it was the borrowed one that died. He said, no, it's not. So he totally denied that claim. It's not some modeh b'miksat. He did admit that it was the rented one that died. Okay, but that was not part of the claim. So he admitted something that wasn't part of the claim, and he actually denied all of the claim. So he didn't admit to any part of the claim, so it's not modeh b'miksat. Why does he even have to make a vow? Amarula al yedei gilgul damar le ishteba li izu mihat de chedarka meta umigo de mishteba de chedarka meta mishteba name de schura meta. It's where the claimant says, the owner of the cows says, make a vow to me in any case that it died a natural death and it was in fact honest, that you weren't negligent, you didn't do something wrong. Because even a socher, he would be liable if he was negligent. So he has to make a vow that in fact this was meta kedarka, honest. He doesn't have to pay. Now that's legitimate. Now once he is making a vow anyway for that, so he says, oh, while you're at it, Gilgul will do an add-on vow that make a vow also that it was the rented one that died. And that's why he has to make a vow. So it's not because of modeh b'miksat, but rather because of Gilgul Shevu'ah. The next case in the Mishnah, Ze omed eni yodeya v'ze omed eni yodeya. Both of them say, we're not sure which of the animals died, if it was the rented one or the borrowed one. So they split it. Hamane sumchusi damar mamon mutar b'safek holkin. This follows the opinion of Sumchus, who says that whenever you have money, then you're not sure who it belongs to, so you divide it equally, rather than say mosim chavero lavaraya, just leave it in the hands of wherever it is, and leave it status quo unless someone else can prove it. Sumchus says no, you split it down the middle, and therefore he has to pay half. Ba'e Rabbi Abba Bar Memal she'ala be'alim sechara shelo be'alim mahu. And now we have a series of questions about slightly more complicated cases of be'alim. So let's say someone borrowed an animal along with the owner, such that if something would happen to it, even honest, he wouldn't have to pay because he had the services of the owner together at that same time. And let's say that borrowing was for 1 month. I'm going to borrow it for 1 month. Good. Now, before that month is up, the borrower says, you know what, I need it for some more time. And the guy says, well, I can't give it to you for free. You have to pay. He says, okay, fine. Now I'll rent it for the 2nd month. So he continues. But when he rents it for the 2nd month, already the owner is no longer under his employment. Maybe the employment is only for the beginning. The key is that be for the beginning, right? Remember, it doesn't matter when the injury happens, if he's still under employment when the injury happens. So what do we say in this case? Here's the two sides. Simple way of approaching it is, these are two separate transactions. Even though they overlap in the middle, there was no break in between. Nevertheless, there's still two separate transactions. And the first one, the borrowing, was with the owner there. And so in that case, if something happened during that 1st month, then they would not be liable. However, the second one, the rental, the owner was not employed, and therefore anything that happens during the second month, Geneva v'Aveda, which Soched is liable to, he will have to pay. That's one way. Or do we say we can look at this 2-month period as one long period that they're connected? Why are they connected? Well, before, when he was just a sho'el, so then, as a sho'el, he's liable to all things. Since the owner was there, that makes him not liable to anything. And so, since part of that liability was geneva v'aveda as a sho'el, and now during the second month, he continues to be liable as a sho'el in geneva v'aveda, and so he should also continue to be exempt because of be'alav imo. And so we just look at the Geneva Veda liability and exemption, and that continues straight through. And therefore, we can continue the Be'alav status, even though for the honest part of it, that changed from being liable to not liable. But actually there's also, in a way, no change because the Shoel was with Baalim, so he's not liable, and now he turns into a Soched who's less liable. And is not liable anyway to honest. So altogether, there's less liability, and for that which he is liable, we should be able to continue the Geneva v'Aveda exemption since the Be'alav imo. That's question 1. What if we flip it around? If you say that in the previous case it does continue, what about if the first month he rents it with the owner there, in which case, as a renter, he would have been liable to Geneva v'Aveda, but the owner is there, so now he's not liable. And as a renter, he's not liable anyway to honest. And now, the second month, he becomes a borrower. So, what do we say in this case? Let's see the two sides. She'ela b'schirut v'adai la shaycha. Do we say, no, it's not appropriate, you can't extend it because as a sho'el, which is the second month, he is more liable. So during the first month when Ba'alav imo, that made him exempt from Geneva v'Aveda. Fine. But now he becomes a sho'el, that jumps up the level of responsibility also to honest. And he was never not liable but beforehand, he was not liable to honest. Now he is liable to honest. So the exemption of Ba'alav imo certainly cannot apply. And since now this is a whole new level of liability, it's considered an entirely new transaction. And that falls away. And if something happens during the second month, even if it's Geneva v'Aveda, the renter will have to pay. Oh, well, the borrower is for the second month. Or do we say, since there is a partial overlap in that when it was rented, he was liable to Geneva v'Aveda, but he was exempt because it was Be'alav imo, and that continues on when he's a sho'el. Also, he's exempt for Geneva v'Aveda. Since part of it continues, so you know what? We consider part to be like the whole, and therefore this is simply an extension of the original deal, just with a slight change, and therefore in the second month he will not be liable at all to anything that the sho'el would be liable to. Now if you say that we are not going to extend it in this last case, because it goes up in the level of liability, so now we can consider it two different transactions. What about she'ela be'ba'alim, uschara she'lo be'ba'alim, ve'chazaru shala ba'mahu? Now that we have 3 periods. The first month, he borrows it. The second month, he becomes a renter. The third month, they extend it again, but now it's borrowing again. What would we say in that case? Hadad atya la she'ila leduchta, o dilma afsika la sechirut bene ubene. Do we say that since he was a borrower in the first month, and then he was a borrower in the third month, so for the third month, we can consider that an extension of the first month. In other words, even if the second month cannot continue the first, but maybe the third month can pick up again. All right, there is some continuity because he did have the cow the entire time under some terms, and so now the third month, look, for sure, if it was 2 months of she'ela, and then she'ela again, and he just continuing, so I want to leave for another month, for sure you would say that the Be'alav continues. So how about here? Okay, there's a break between, but you're going back to it. So can you say that? And lastly, sechara be'ba'ali mushala v'chazaru sechara mahu. What if it was a rental first, and then a borrowing in the middle, and then back to a rental? Mi amrina natya la sechirut educhta o dilma afsika la she'ela bene u bene. Do we say that since it was a socher at the beginning, and then a socher again at the end, so it continues straight through, or maybe because he was a shoel in the middle, being a shoel is an interruption, and then there is no continuity, and he would be liable in the third month. Teko will leave all these questions unanswered. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.